He should have fallen from the sky the moment his plane was torn in half. But somehow, it kept flying, held together by rope, blood, and the unbreakable will of a crew that refused to die. This isn't a story about victory. It's a story about survival, about a bomber with no tail, and a pilot who wouldn't let go. About one final flight that should have ended in fire, but landed in history instead. This is the true story of the bomber that wouldn't fall. February 1st, 1943. High above the icy fields of North Africa, the air cracked and screamed with fire. The B-17 bomber named All-American was deep into its return flight from a bombing run over German-occupied Tunis. The crew, weary but alert, watched the skies as their formation thinned. Some planes had already gone down, swallowed by the flak clouds and Luftwaffe hunters. Inside All-American, the men barely had time to breathe before it happened. A German Messerschmitt fighter, already trailing smoke, dove at them in a suicide attack. It collided with the tail. Metal shrieked like a beast in agony. The impact ripped a gaping hole in the fuselage, tearing away nearly the entire rear section. The tail gunner screamed but somehow clung to his station. Cables snapped. Steel peeled open like paper. The aircraft shook, dipped, but didn't fall. Inside, the pilot, First Lieutenant Ken Bragg Jr., gripped the controls with both hands, eyes wide, heart pounding. He could feel the aircraft resisting him, its spine half gone, its balance shattered, but still it flew. And in that moment, as alarms wailed and freezing wind tore through the open gash behind them, the crew knew one thing: they weren't dead yet. The sky wanted them, but they weren't ready to give in. The smell of oil, cordite, and burning fabric filled the cabin. Wind howled through the gaping wound where the tail used to be, whipping at flight suits and loose cables. In the chaos, Technical Sergeant John Brennan, flight, engineer and gunner, crawled across the groaning floor toward the edge of oblivion. What was left of the tail section dangled, held by shreds of metal and sheer luck. It could break away at any second, and if it did, the plane would go into an uncontrollable spin, killing them all. Brennan knew this, and yet without hesitation, he tied a length of parachute cord around his waist, clipped it to a broken support beam, and stepped into the torn fuselage, his boots scraping dangerously close to open air. With frozen fingers and bleeding palms, he began securing what he could: tarp, rope, leather, anything to bind the broken pieces together. The plane shuddered with every gust, with every turn, but still he worked. No one ordered him to. No one had to. Above the chaos, Lichtenberg kept the bomber steady, refusing to panic. Down below, Brennan whispered to himself, "You'll hold, you son of a gun. You'll hold it till we land." And for now, the tail, tattered and trembling, did. They hadn't made it out of danger, far from it. As All-American limped through the sky, trailing smoke and spark, the enemy flak guns along the coast opened up again. The clouds ahead were black with shrapnel, bursting like thunder in the cold February air. Flak tore through the sky in jagged bursts, some so close the entire fuselage vibrated with the concussion. The crew held their breath each time a burst bloomed ahead, expecting the final blow, but it never came. Miraculously, they threaded the needle, the wounded bomber navigating, a corridor of destruction like a blind. Man running through gunfire. One engine coughed, then sputtered. The controls grew heavy in Bragg's hands. Every movement became a prayer. Inside the cabin, the men steadied themselves, no longer fighting the war, but fighting to stay alive. The radio was down. The tail gunner bled from the face, still manning his station even though behind him there was nothing but sky. Pieces of the plane had peeled away entirely, but the heart of it, the will of the crew, held fast. They weren't flying on power anymore. They were flying on memory, on instinct, and on the thinnest thread of hope. Inside the battered cabin, lit only by the weak flicker of a dying cockpit lamp, Navigator Second Lieutenant Harry Capel hunched over a torn map. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from blood loss. A jagged shard of shrapnel had torn through his left sleeve, and red now stained the chart where the radio operator had gone silent. His headset lay on the floor, cracked open. There were no coordinates coming in, no voice guiding them, just ink, instinct, and the ache of survival. Capel took a pencil from behind his ear, snapped in half, but still usable, and drew one more line across the map. The course was risky, crossing just beneath enemy airspace, but it was the fastest way back to the Allied airfield near Beaune. His voice, hoarse but steady, cut through the cabin. "This is it. This is our last heading, home." The crew didn't question it. They didn't nod or cheer. They simply trusted him as they always had. And in that moment, the map wasn't just paper. It was salvation, folded, bloodied, and lit by a single light in a sky that wanted them dead. The airstrip came into view like a dream. Shimmering through smoke, sun, and disbelief, All-American was no longer a bomber. It was a floating skeleton, held together by threads of rope, scorched metal, and stubborn will. One engine was dead. The rear landing gear had buckled inward. The tail section sagged, groaning with each mile like it would fall at any moment. Inside, the crew braced against the walls. Some whispered to God, others to the faces in their pockets, the wives, the children, the homes they hadn't seen in months. Lieutenant Bragg stared straight ahead, hands shaking slightly on the yoke. "We don't land this plane," he muttered under his breath. "We survive it." The wheels touched dirt with a scream. Metal shrieked. The tail lurched. The entire frame bucked and scraped, dragging its broken body across the ground in a storm of sparks and dust. And then silence. The kind of silence you don't believe at first. The kind you listen to with your breath held, just to be sure it's real. They'd made it. When the crew emerged, ground personnel ran toward the wreckage in stunned awe. One mechanic dropped his wrench, staring wide-eyed at the gaping hole in the bomber's back. When the crew emerged, ground personnel ran toward the wreckage in stunned awe. One mechanic dropped his wrench, staring wide-eyed at the gaping hole in the bomber's back. "How the hell did this thing stay in the air?" he asked. Sergeant Brennan, still stained with blood and soot, simply looked up and said, "Because it had to. Subscribe for more Wings of Valor."